And the thing is, either way, we're going to develop beliefs and attitudes about how we view ourselves, how we view our capabilities, maybe what we deserve or don't deserve in life, based on how we look at it. But those beliefs and attitudes are going to be very different depending on which question you ask. Did it happen to me, victim, or did it happen for me, warrior? Welcome to the season 3 finale episode of the Hope Warrior Project podcast. This is our finale episode because we're taking a little break while we await the newest little Hope Warrior to be born. If you weren't aware, Lydia is pregnant with baby number 4 and due kind of any day now. By the time this episode goes live, hopefully the baby will already be here. I'm sure you'll appreciate that, Lydia, right?
Yes, please.
So we're going to take a little break, give her some time for her and the baby to settle in. Maybe she can try to get some sleep. So Lydia, I know you and your husband decided not to find out the sex of this baby this time, which I think is so cool. But do you have a feeling about what it is?
Yes. So I think it's a boy, and it seems like most people think it's a boy. I'm going to do the old social media poll today, maybe see what more people think. But the people that I've talked to, it seems like boy is the popular choice. And even people, when they're talking to me and don't realize it, they say he. But that's why I think it might be a girl, because I just feel like that's how things work, right? Like we're so positive about one thing, and then we get that curveball. So I don't know. We're really just excited either way. And I definitely want Everest to be able to experience having a brother, but at the same time, I'm more of a girl mom. I like the glitter. I like the bows, the tutus. So I'm ready either way. Let's go. Let's do this.
That's pretty impressive that you like glitter. I feel like a lot of my mom friends hate glitter. I love glitter, so I'll come play with the girls. Well, I think it's a boy. I don't know. I'm one of those people that just like automatically referenced it as he. So we will find out soon. But before we head off for this little break, this little intermission from our podcast, we wanted to take this opportunity to reflect on the importance of knowing and sharing our stories. So if you've listened to our past episodes, you'll know that our guests, they share their story of a particular challenge that they faced and those raw, sometimes really ugly emotions that come along with it, and then what helped them get through that period of their life. And then each time we've seen that it has created some form of transformation, positive transformation in their lifestyle and mindset. So, well, why do we do this? Why is this the point of our podcast? Well, we want you, our listeners, to know that you're not alone in the challenges that you face and those crazy feelings and thoughts that may come along with those challenges. And by hearing someone else's journey, you can gain some hope for yourself and whatever you're going through. So we believe, we know in our hearts that there is a lot of power in sharing stories. But there is also power in just knowing your story. And so that's what we want to talk to you about today.
Right. So in order to share your story, you first have to kind of know it, right? So that's the first step, I guess. So Steph and I, we've been doing a lot of like research around this and just super curious about how this works. And what we've come across a lot, and it's really cool because, and now I feel like we're equipped with this new tool that we can even dive deeper into, like understanding this, because I feel like subconsciously we kind of understood it, and that's why we were drawn to sharing people's stories. But now we're kind of understanding really more of like what's going on underneath the layers. So basically, story is how we all cope with life, whether you are conscious of it or not. It's how your mind works. So whenever something happens, your mind is just creating this story of why it happened, how it happened, the series of events, and kind of it's building up these, it's looking for connections, it's building up these beliefs to like better prepare you for if this happens again or different variations of this happening in the future. So it's just really interesting that that's how the mind works. But then so many of us don't really tap into that. And then what happens is that we come up with stories that really don't serve us and hold us back because we're not playing an active role in what story is being formulated in our brains. And a lot of it is subconscious. So we're making decisions, we're reacting to situations, and we don't even necessarily maybe understand what our motivations are. We're just kind of going through the motions and, taking it as it comes. And then we're just so confused when things don't go the way we want them to, right? So if your brain is already formulating these stories, wouldn't you rather have a say on what that story is that's already being written in your mind? If you could kind of interfere and guide it to something that's going to be more in line with what you want your life to look like and what your values are, then wouldn't you do that? So that's really the power of looking at your story, and doing that work, even though sometimes it can be a little bit difficult because obviously when we're young, our life is completely in the hands of other people. And so unfortunately, even when those people mean well, sometimes it feels like we can't be ourselves, right? Because they're pushing their beliefs or their stories onto us. Even if they're not bad stories, maybe they're just not right for us. So a quote that I found, and actually it's kind of interesting because in preparing for this episode, I've been diving into a few different sources, and I heard this quote in two different sources. So I know, Stephanie, I shared this quote with you, I think earlier yesterday, but then I heard it again in a different audiobook later at night. So I was like, okay, so yeah, I am supposed to share this because it's coming up again. So it's by, the quote is from James Baldwin, and it's, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." So that's what we're talking about, is facing the events of your life, your story, what the experiences that you have and how they may be affecting you today. So, and the awesome part about this is that when we do reflect on our stories, as difficult as that may be, because maybe there's some trauma there, maybe there's some things that we kind of pushed away and don't want to think about, we can, when we understand what happened, we can unidentify it with them, right? So yesterday, Steph, me and you were talking about how we listened to this podcast the other day, and there was this woman sharing her story about like her challenges. And I'm not going to go into details, but it was just something that like both Steph and I were very shocked by. And we were just like, oh my gosh, how could she bear all this at such a young age and talk about it in such a intellectual way now? Like, how is she not bawling? How is she not falling apart? Like, this is terrible, terrible things that she experienced in her life. But you could tell that it was because she did the work. She reflected on her story. She understood what happened and that it wasn't, her fault. And she released, that story and unidentified with it, so that when she was talking about it, it was almost as if she was talking about somebody else, right? It wasn't something that had a hold on her anymore. So that's the first thing that knowing your story can really do for you, is that you can, once you bring it to the surface, you can let it go, right? So just like in the quote says, it's like nothing can be changed until it's faced.
Times when I've gotten really stirred up, something made me angry, or I got really frustrated, or, a big one for me is if I feel insecure. Those are really strong emotions, but why? Why am I feeling that emotion? Well, I think a lot of the reason is because I've assigned some kind of meaning subconsciously to these experiences that I've had in my life. And that, that meaning, I think, is shaped by a lot of different things. It could be, how we're raised, societal pressures and norms, culture, like you mentioned, Lydia, other people's stories that they kind of put on you, right? And so then you kind of take on that meaning as well. And so these things just happen. I think it's not to blame, we don't have to feel bad that we've done this, but it's recognizing and being aware that this is this just happens. It happens to all of us. But when I can know my story, so really look back and understand the experiences that I've had, and understand how that maybe affected me back then I can understand what is triggering my emotions today and why. Then I can understand why I'm reacting so strongly, why this particular thing, which really in the scope of life is probably a very inconsequential, insignificant thing. But to me, it may seem so huge because it reminded me of something I went through as a child or in my younger days or whatever that really caused me some pain. And so it just makes that feeling, I think, so much more intense. But then I think once we understand this, okay, my emotions have been triggered. Yes, I'm reacting strongly to that, but I can choose to then respond. I can go from that, feeling, that emotion to thought, right? Like I can choose to use my mind, my brain to say, okay, this is not who I am. I can be more intentional about how I respond. And then, like I said, kind of write out that emotion instead of identifying with it. I think it's important to not expect ourselves to suppress emotions. That has a whole set of its own negative consequences when we just try to push down emotions, act like they're not there, ignore them, deny them. That's not good. So I think we have to recognize the emotions, and they're valid. We're humans. Humans have emotions. That is just how we are. But the more we understand what caused them, the better. And I think, a lot of this is really understanding the key to it is a lot of this is happening subconsciously. We didn't necessarily sit down one day and decide that I'm going to get really upset when something happens like this, right? We didn't do that intentionally. We didn't think about it. It just happens without us even knowing it. And so our stories, our experiences, they're affecting us, whether we know it or not. So, like you said earlier, Lydia, wouldn't we rather have some say in how that story is being written in our mind, and understanding what the real story was? Because sometimes I think we exaggerate, maybe come up with things that didn't necessarily happen that way, or we maybe forget things, suppress things that happened. So there's a lot of value in our daily life, I think, in understanding the experiences that have happened to us.
Yeah, and it is a process too, that observing your emotions is something that you've built up for such a long time in your brain. And right, we know we have those like neural pathways that are constantly being triggered and fired up. So the more that we can, like you were saying, Steph, like if we can acknowledge our triggers and then notice it when it's happening and just saying like, okay, like I see what's happening here. It's not necessarily going to just go away. I wish it was just like, oh, I see it now. And then now I'm in the clear. But that's just not how our physical bodies work, because those neural pathways are so deep that it takes, I don't know if it's just as much time. I don't know what the comparison is, but it's going to take a lot of time to undo that. If you have if you had a very controlling relationship as a child, like if one of your parents was very controlling over you, or that's how you perceived it, right? Because maybe it wasn't necessarily true, but that's how you perceived it. You felt controlled, and that really, really bothered you. And so you have this pathway in your brain with feeling controlled. And then later on in your adult life, you are in a relationship and you feel controlled, even though, again, maybe you're not being controlled, but that's how you perceive it because you have that pathway in your brain. When you recognize it and when you identify it, then you'll feel the physical response to it, right? You'll feel triggered. You'll feel like you want to get upset, like you want to attack or whatever, however you deal with things. But if you can just take take yourself out of the driver's seat and just observe and be like, okay, this is what I'm feeling. And I understand that because I had this confusing, controlling relationship when I was young, and I'm still dealing with that. And if you can kind of just like talk yourself off that ledge, like your body might still be responding, but you're reversing that pathway in your brain, because now your mind is like, okay, I'm not being controlled. And then every time you go through that process, you're making progress on fixing that so that it eventually doesn't happen anymore or happen as much or even affect you. So the overall, I guess, goal of all of this, right, is clarity. We want to reflect on our stories to get clarity so that we can make better decisions moving forward. Because yes, it is nice to be able to deal with our triggers in a more responsible way and to be a little bit more at peace and calm, right? But the bottom line is the reason why we want to be calm and at peace is because we want to make better decisions. We want to stop like the hamster wheel of making the same decision over and over and over again that isn't necessarily serving us or in line with our values. And we're living out these stories that have been essentially like written for us because they're written from the influences of people that were around us as we were building up these beliefs. Like something that I will tell myself is, I'm a forward thinker. Like I'm goal oriented. I want to move forward, so I don't want to look back. Like that's not affecting me that much. Like it was bad, but like I'm not letting it affect me, right? Because I'm not thinking about it. But the reality is that the opposite is true. And that when we do push those experiences down and we don't talk about them or reflect on them or even just begin to understand them, they actually show up more, which is kind of a cruel thing, right? Because we're just like, we want to be past it. I don't want to think about it. But then it comes up in trickier ways too. So it's harder to deal with because it'll come up in a secondary relationship, right? So if you had this huge struggle with a parent, then all of a sudden you're having the same struggle with your spouse in a different way. So maybe you don't make the connection and it just takes you that much longer to like heal that because now you're dealing with it in two different ways. So hiding it, pushing it down, avoiding it, denying that it has any hold over you is really having the opposite effect. So bringing it to the surface, looking at it, just being curious too, like just asking questions and opening yourself up to the possibility that, yeah, maybe that is affecting me. And that will just start you on this process of healing. And also, I did want to say that it can also manifest, not only can you take the same problems into new relationships, but it can even manifest in your health. So like we are seeing this growing problem of people relying on antidepressants and anti-anxiety meds. And I feel like that is a direct result of people not owning their stories or not looking at their stories. Because I think that our culture kind of teaches us to just go, keep achieving, keep doing. And so we avoid that stuff, and then it manifests in these anxious thoughts and these like depressive moods and things like that. And we really don't understand why it's happening. But really, it's just, we need to do some work on ourselves and our stories.
Yeah, absolutely. And that depression and anxiety, I mean, again, here comes in the subconscious thing. We don't realize that those experiences and those ways that we've interpreted things that have happened in our life could be causing our depression or anxiety or whatever we're feeling today. And I'm not saying like that's not all the cases, right? So not a doctor, disclaimer, not a health professional. But I mean, I can speak for myself that I know there are times where I start feeling really down and depressed. And after a couple of days, I can look back on it and be like, yeah, that was because I was kind of like stewing or somehow under the surface thinking about things that have happened in the past. And it just brought me down. I didn't realize it in the moment. And that's where I think, distance kind of helps give us that clarity. When we are in the thick of whatever situation we are in, and that strong emotion, sometimes it's hard to get that clarity, right? Because our emotions really kind of blind us from that. And that's why I think it's important to look back. Like you mentioned, Lydia, sometimes we don't want to look back because we don't want to feel those feelings again. But if we don't, we're not going to understand those feelings and how they're affecting us today. So when we can look back, understand, again, the real story without that emotional interpretation in the moment, then it's going to help us, give us that clarity. And then once we're aware of that, this is what I think is the awesome part. We can reframe how we look at the hard things we go through. Maybe we were betrayed or made fun of as a child or even as adult, bullied, something like that. Maybe we experienced a severe injury or lost a job. Our natural tendency in those situations is to feel the bad feelings, sad and helpless, get angry, feeling that insecurity. And again, valid emotions. But then we have the opportunity to make the choice to view it from another lens, which is, why did this happen for me? That's a completely different mentality. And the thing is, either way, we're going to develop beliefs and attitudes about how we view ourselves, how we view our capabilities, maybe what we deserve or don't deserve in life, based on how we look at it. But those beliefs and attitudes are going to be very different depending on which question you ask. Did it happen to me, victim, or did it happen for me, warrior, right? Overall, if we believe that our life experience exists for our overall growth as a person, if we just believe that foundationally, like, yes, I believe the things I'm going through are to help me grow as a person, it makes that shift, I think, a lot easier. And then with that, we can understand that, these challenges that we're going through, it's that they're there to help us. It's not just to beat us down and burden us, but it's there to help. And so when we understand that, I think it just helps us to be more empathetic to others and understand that this process is happening to everyone.
Yeah, there are just countless benefits to understanding how your mind works and understanding your body, realizing that you can detach, you can observe, and by doing that, you can make little adjustments and make such a huge difference in your future. It's not something you should do on your own either, because you do have blind spots. And also, like, it's so much easier to go into habit and to go into like what we're used to doing. So sometimes when you feel triggered, like, you might not have the capacity to deal with it. So having a hope warrior in your life that you can text and say, hey, I'm having that thought that I'm not good enough, and just them being able to speak truth to you and be like, okay, like, we talked about this, like, remember this, remember this, and just reminding you of like what your truth is. That's such a big help. And just constantly staying curious and knowing that this is a lifelong journey, and that there's layers to it, right? So just even like I said, in preparing for this episode, I was diving into a lot of different resources, some YouTube videos, books, podcasts, and one that I was listening to the other day was talking about like transference, and how when we're young, we have these really important influential relationships, right? And a huge one is our parents, right? Like, who are you influenced by more than who like actually raises you? So if that's not your parents, maybe your grandparents or whoever it was. I made this connection just yesterday that in my own personal story, my mother struggled with bipolar disorder, which at the time it wasn't even called that. It was called like manic depressive disorder or something. I don't know, but it was a while ago that she got diagnosed. She's been gone for almost 10 years now. I had to grow up with that. And it was a really, really difficult thing to experience as a growing girl, because it probably showed up originally when I was in like grammar school, like early grammar school. Before she started to struggle with that, like, I mean, just like most kids, like, your mom is like God, right? She is everything to you. And she was just a superwoman, and I loved her more than I could explain. Like, my kids tell me a million times a day how much they love me, and I'm like, oh my God, I remember feeling that way as a little girl. Like, I love you, like, obsessively, I love you, like, stay with me. And And we just had it was like this incredible, beautiful love. But then as I was getting older, I watched her like slowly change. So that was really, really difficult for me because I saw her as one way, but then saw this shift and saw her struggle with this illness. And then eventually it got so bad that she, was trying to check out, to end her life. And the message that I got from that was that I wasn't enough for her to stick around, that like I wasn't good enough for her to want to live, like that I couldn't save her from this. And obviously that is an absurd thought because it is a physical illness that now I'm like really starting to learn about, because I was doing that whole I don't want to think about it, I'm just going to push it down and move forward thing. But now that I'm realizing the importance of understanding it, like I want to understand what was going on in her mind to get her to that place where she didn't want to live anymore. But I didn't deal with it. And then it showed up in a very different way in my marriage. Like, I was so madly in love with him when I met him and when we got married. And then we didn't necessarily do things right in our marriage early on. And slowly I watched him change, just like I watched my mom change. And then we were really struggling in our marriage. And I remember looking at him the same way that I would look at my mom and think, I don't even know who you are anymore. And then it led to us getting separated. And so then the message again that I got was like, you're not good enough for me to want to stick around. So even though the circumstances were different, it was my same story that I was telling myself. And it was affecting me in such like deep, deep ways. And I mean, I'm so grateful that we both, my husband and I, like dove into our stories as individuals and as a couple, and we did the work to figure out these triggers and how like we respond to one another. And so now, like, we have a completely different relationship, but we're also two completely different individuals as well, because we have released so many things from our stories. So that's just kind of like my personal example of just the other day, how I made a new connection, and I feel that it's already bringing me healing.
Which I think is such a great point, that we're never done, right? We are continually finding new things about our story, different aspects, because it's not just one story. There's a lot of different things that happen. I mean, it all makes up like one big story, I guess you could say. We could write a book about our lives, but there's various chapters, there's various experiences and events. So I think you're continuing to learn new things. For myself, I'm currently exploring an aspect of my life, kind of going back to my childhood. And, I have to just be honest here. I used to always think, this idea of like, oh, looking back at your childhood, I was like, whatever, that's just bogus, but no, I'm learning that that's not the case, that our childhood, what we learn, how we learn to respond to things, think about things, continues to affect us in our adult life. And I'm learning that, I've been learning that here over the last, couple of years. And I'm really exploring an aspect of, my life that I've seen affect me today. And I never really put two and two together before, never. I never really made that connection before, that some of the things that really bother me today, I now can see are as a result of things that I went through as a child. And it caused me to behave in a certain way to protect myself. And now that protecting myself is like causing damage. So, we're all continually exploring aspects of our stories. We're not all in the same place, with understanding our story. And so, if someone out there is like, wow, I've not even thought about my story, that's fine. Now you can start thinking about it. And somebody else may be like, yeah, I've been thinking about my story for years. Well, they're probably not done either. So it's just a continual process. And, this season in our podcast, Lydia and I, we both shared part of our stories. You shared about some of the challenges that you went through in your marriage. So, anyone that didn't hear that episode, go back and listen to it, and you'll understand more about Lydia's story. And mine was the journey that I went through with infertility. But what I found for myself is that when I looked back and really thought about what I went through, was honest with myself about the feelings that I had when I was in like the thick of it, because they were bad feelings. They were feelings that I would have not wanted to share with people because I was embarrassed. But when I could be honest with myself and understand, yeah, that's how I felt, and this is what it caused me to think and how it caused me to behave, it allowed me to own that. Like, I can now own it. It doesn't own me. And that is such a healing feeling, I guess, to have that. I don't know if power is the right word, but it's just like a bit more confidence. Like, yeah, I did go through that, and I did feel that way, and it sucked and I hated it. But throughout that, these are all the things that I learned. And even looking back, I'm still learning things about that. So there's definitely power in sharing our story, knowing our story, sharing it, being vulnerable. And then that really creates true connections with others when we're able to share it. And I think then again, that goes back to why we do this podcast and why we've enjoyed it so much. Like I said, we're wrapping up season 3, and it has been just awesome hearing all the variety of stories that people have shared with us, and just the encouragement that it provides. So, and feeling like you connected to them, like emotionally. You may not know that person from Adam, but there's something that just kind of connects you with their story when you hear it.
If you have listened to episodes of our podcast, we tend to attract these bigger traumas that people are dealing with, or they experience like this really, really difficult thing like cancer or, going to prison. And we're going to go through a few of the stories just to share some examples. But even if you had like a pretty comfortable upbringing and nothing like really sticks out as something that was like life changing, there's still stories that are affecting you, and it's still as important to look at your story. So just we wanted to share like a few kind of the shifts that we like witnessed this season on our podcast. So early on, we had Katie, who her story was that she didn't feel like she fit in anywhere because she's Black and she was adopted into an all-white family. So she felt like she acted more white, right? Because she was being raised under that influence, but then wasn't really accepted into that community because of the way she looked. And so her story is really reflecting back on her upbringing, learning about herself, realizing that her uniqueness, like that part of her story makes her truly special and unique and gives her an edge because she can kind of understand both races and she can fit in a very special way. And by her accepting this, like she can really thrive and feel good about who she is. And then we had Dana, who she was very athletic, like training for the Olympics, and felt very good about like accomplishing and striving for goals. And that's what she kind of seemed like she built a lot of her worth up in. So she felt like the more she accomplished, the more like worthy she was, the better off she was. So I recommend listening to that one. But really, she had to just surrender and trust, and ultimately she was healed and is able to walk today and just approaches life completely differently. And then we had Liz, who her limiting belief, her story that she was telling herself was that she was a failure because she was struggling with depression. And she felt like it was her responsibility to just push past it, to not let it be, like a weakness. And it worked for a little bit until she couldn't do it anymore and was feeling suicidal herself. And she, had to really accept her depression for what it was, that it was just something that she was experiencing and it wasn't something that identified who she was. So she learned to observe her mind and understand how it works. She even has like this blog about her jerk brain and how her jerk brain says all these things that aren't true, but she can detach and she can just say, well, that's not me, that's my depression. And she can respond to it in a positive way. And again, use that challenge as something that makes her unique and gives her empathy for other people, and just using it in a way that gives her an edge, and that's something that she needs to identify with.
And I always love the concept of the jerk brain. I'd never heard it put that way. I think I call it the little bully that lives inside my head and tries to tell me I'm not doing things right or I'm not good enough. But yeah, same concept. So it's funny, like even the stories that you just mentioned, there was something I was able to identify in each one, like or relate to, even though that specific situation wasn't my story, I could still relate to some of the feelings, which I think is so awesome about these stories that we hear. A few other ones. So Lauren, she is someone who felt that growing up, she needed to be perfect, overachiever, really good in school, had to just, be perceived as perfect. But that was leading her down some really poor roads and became, addicted to drugs and alcohol, and finally realized that, instead of being perfect, she realized that that idea was pushing her to be something that she wasn't, which was not perfect at all, right? I mean, like, why would we want to try to be something we're not? So it's just having the opposite effect on her. And so when she realized that she could make good decisions for her life and feel more complete and whole in who she was, and is much happier and fulfilled today, which I think is what we all want. Lewis, his story was so interesting. He's the one that was sentenced to life in prison, life plus 100 years actually in prison. And part of this came from when he was growing up, he had this idea that being feared meant that he was respected. If you fear me, that means you respect me. And through what he went through in the transformation in his life, he learned that actually it's the humility that earns true respect. And he's making a big difference in so many more people's lives today in a positive way than the difference he was making in people's lives in the past in a very negative way, with that idea. And then Haley, she is someone that has a cancer survivor. Before she even realized that she had cancer or could have cancer, she had this mindset of just needing to do it all, right? Like, I got to do it all. I keep pushing. I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm working hard, I've got to do it all. She had an idea that, she even said that this is going to cause me a problem. I think all this stress is going to have some negative effect on me, right? But she didn't take any steps to really make a big change until found out that indeed it was killing her, literally. Then made those changes in her life and took control of her own health and her own mindset, and made those decisions for herself instead of relying on other people and depending on other people to, tell her what she should do or how she should live. Again, like, yes, I want that. Like, don't we all want that ability to be like, yes, I am making decisions, good decisions for my life, instead of doing it based on what society or family or friends or whoever else is telling me to do. Some really awesome stories and transformations. Again, big transformations in people's lives based on how they decided to kind of view what they were going through in a different way. Why is this happening for me, not to me?
Yeah. And so I think that listening to these stories is an excellent way to start doing the work, because like you said, Steph, like, we can see a little bit of ourselves in every single one of these stories. I certainly can. Maybe not the being feared is being respected, because I don't think anybody's scared of me.
Maybe your kids, I don't know.
Oh, true. Yeah. That's like a parenting thing, right? Like,
Hey.
when you yell at your kids, you're like, well, that's how they listen. But yeah, so maybe I can relate. But yeah, so it's like, that's an awesome way to do the work in a way that like connects you with others too, because it is kind of difficult to just sit down and like journal about your story. Like, that can be a little painful. And although I do recommend it, or talking about it with a therapist, or, going through some guided questions. Like there's journals out there that will take you through kind of like a self-reflection process. But I feel like listening to other people's stories is like the easiest and most enjoyable way to kind of reflect on your own story, because you will naturally see like what comes up in you. And then you can at least have that as a starting point of like, I want to explore that somewhere. Because when she was talking about her relationship with her mom being really disconnected or whatever it was, like I felt a little bit emotional when I thought maybe I had a good relationship. Like maybe I need to look at that. So just using it like as ways to see what brings up emotion in you, and then using that as a start off point to kind of explore why that was happening and why you connect to that person. Start doing that work for yourself. Go back, listen to some of the stories we've shared in the past. Like we've said, this is season 3, so there's quite a bit out there already. And don't do it alone, right? Ask friends and family to help you through the process. If there's black holes in your memory, which I have them because that's how I was dealing, right? I was pushing things away. I didn't want to think about it. So there's a lot of things that I just don't remember. Just the other day, I called my dad and was asking him specifics about what happened with my mom, because I just so badly want to understand so that I can accept it and like let it go and not have it, continue to have this hold over me. And then also, if you want to reach out to us, feel free. Our email is hopewarriorproject@gmail.com. If you want to share a little bit about what you're struggling with, we can certainly maybe suggest one of the episodes if we feel like it connects with someone's story, or even connect you with that person. Like these are all people that we have like I want to say personal relationships, because a lot of them we know through the computer, right? Through social media, like they're on the other side of the world, but these are people that we've had multiple conversations with. So we can most certainly, and they're all open to being hope warriors and helping people. So we can connect you with people that understand maybe your circumstance because they've gone through something similar. And then if you have been doing this work and you feel like you already have some awesome lessons that you've learned from your own story and that you're willing and excited to share, we would love to talk to you about being a guest on our show. And then lastly, subscribe to the podcast so that you are notified when we have a new story, and share it with your friends, because you never know who needs a little bit of extra encouragement and who's going to connect with a specific story and hear exactly what they need, exactly when they need it, to have that light bulb turn on and just kind of make that shift and start to reflect and do the work, so that life starts to feel like it's happening for them and not to them. That's all we have. Thank you so much for listening to our finale. I know this episode was a little bit different, but I hope that you found value in it, and we will be back shortly.
Thank you for joining us today. Go take a listen to our other episodes. We think you'll be encouraged and inspired by what you hear.
Are you interested in sharing your story of hope on this podcast? Contact us at hopewarriorproject@gmail.com. We'd love the opportunity to help you share your story.